First-person shooter is a video game genre centered on gun and projectile weapon-based combat through a first-person perspective, that is, the player experiences the action through the eyes of the protagonist. The first-person shooter shares common traits with other shooter games, which in turn fall under the heading action game. From the genre's inception, advanced 3D or pseudo-3D graphics have challenged hardware development, and multiplayer gaming has been integral. The first-person shooter has since been traced as far back as Maze War, development of which began in 1973, and 1974's Sporezime. After early, more playful titles like Midi Maze in 1987, the genre coalesced into a more wantonly violent form with 1992's Wolfenstein 3D, which has been credited with creating the genre proper and the basic archetype upon which subsequent titles were based. One such title, and the progenitor of the genre's wider mainstream acceptance and popularity, was Doom. Perhaps one of the most influential games in this genre. For many years, the term Doom clone was used to designate this genre due to Doom's influence. 1998's Half-Life, along with its 2004 sequel Half-Life 2, enhanced the narrative and puzzle elements. In 1999, Half-Life's mod Counter-Strike was released, and together with Doom is perhaps the most influential first-person shooters. GoldenEye 007 was a landmark first-person shooter for home consoles, while the Halo series heightened the console's commercial and critical appeal as a platform for first-person shooter titles. In the 21st century, the first-person shooter is the most commercially viable video game genre, and has more market share of any other genre in the gaming industry. Several first-person shooters have been popular games for esports and competitive gaming competitions as well. Definition: first-person shooters are a type of three-dimensional shooter game, featuring a first-person point of view with which the player sees the action through the eyes of the player character. They are unlike third-person shooters, in which the player can see the character they are controlling. The primary design element is combat, mainly involving firearms. They are also often categorized as being distinct from light gun shooters, a similar genre with a first-person perspective which use light gun peripherals. In contrast to first-person shooters which use conventional input devices for movement, a more important key difference is that first-person light gun shooters like Virtua Cop often feature on-rails movement, whereas first-person shooters like Doom give the player more freedom to roam. The first-person shooter may be considered a distinct genre in itself, or a type of shooter game, in turn a subgenre of the wider action game genre. Following the release of Doom in 1993, games in this style were commonly termed Doom clones. In time, this term has largely been replaced by first-person shooter. Wolfenstein 3D, released in 1992, the year before Doom, has been credited with inventing the genre, but critics have since identified similar though less advanced games developed as far back as 1973. There are occasional disagreements regarding the specific design elements which constitute a first-person shooter. For example, Deus Ex or BioShock may be considered as first-person shooters, but may also be considered role-playing video games as they borrow from this genre extensively. Some commentators extend the definition to include combat flight simulators where the cockpit or vehicle takes place of the hands and weapons. Game design. Like most shooter games, first-person shooters involve an avatar, one or more ranged weapons, and a varying number of enemies. Because they take place in a 3D environment, these games tend to be somewhat more realistic than 2D shooter games, and have more accurate representations of gravity, lighting, sound and collisions. First-person shooters played on personal computers are most often controlled with a combination of a keyboard and mouse. This system has been claimed as superior to that found in console games, which frequently use two analog sticks. one used for running and sidestepping, the other for looking and aiming. It is common to display the character's hands and weaponry in the main view, with a head-up display showing health, ammunition and location details. Often, it is possible to overlay a map of the surrounding area. Combat and power-ups. First-person shooters often focus on action gameplay, with fast-paced and bloody firefights, though some place a greater emphasis on narrative, problem-solving and logic puzzles. In addition to shooting, melee combat may also be used extensively. In some games, melee weapons are especially powerful, a reward for the risk the player must take in maneuvering his character into close proximity to the enemy. In other situations, a melee weapon may be less effective, but necessary as a last resort. Tactical shooters are more realistic, and require teamwork and strategy to succeed. The player often commands a squad of characters, which may be controlled by the game or by human teammates. First-person shooters typically give players a choice of weapons, which have a large impact on how the player will play the game. Some game designs have realistic models of actual existing or historical weapons, incorporating their rate of fire, magazine size, ammunition amount, recoil and accuracy. Other first-person shooter games may incorporate imaginative variations of weapons, including future prototypes, alien technology, scenario-defined weaponry, or utilizing a wide array of projectiles, from industrial labor tools to laser, energy, plasma, rocket and grenade launchers or crossbows. These many variations may also be applied to the tossing animations of grenades, rocks, spears and the such. Also, more unconventional modes of destruction may be employed from the viewable user's hand, such as flames, electricity, telekinesis or other supernatural constructions. However, designers often allow characters to carry varying multiples of weapons with little to no reduction in speed or mobility. Or perhaps more realistically, a pistol or smaller device and a long rifle, or even limiting the player to only one weapon at a time. There are often options to trade up, upgrade or swap out in most games. Thus, the standards of realism varies between design elements. The protagonist can generally be healed and rearmed by means of items such as first aid kits, simply by walking over them. Some games allow players to accumulate experience points similar to those found in role-playing games, which can unlock new weapons and abilities. Level design. First-person shooters may be structurally composed of levels, or use the technique of a continuous narrative in which the game never leaves the first-person perspective. Others feature large sandbox environments, which are not divided into levels and can be explored freely. In first-person shooters, protagonists interact with the environment to varying degrees, from basics such as using doors, to problem-solving puzzles based on a variety of interactive objects. In some games, the player can damage the environment, also to varying degrees. One common device is the use of barrels containing explosive material which the player can shoot, destroying them and harming nearby enemies. Other games feature environments which are extensively destructible, allowing for additional visual effects. The game world will often make use of science fiction, historic or modern military themes, with such antagonists as aliens, monsters, terrorists and soldiers of various types. Games feature multiple difficulty settings. In harder modes, enemies are tougher, more aggressive and do more damage, and power-ups are limited. In easier modes, the player can succeed through reaction times alone. On more difficult settings, it is often necessary to memorize the levels through trial and error. Multiplayer. First-person shooters may feature a multiplayer mode, taking place on specialized levels. Some games are designed specifically for multiplayer gaming, and have very limited single-player modes in which the player competes against game-controlled characters termed bots. Massively multiplayer online first-person shooters allow thousands of players to compete at once in a persistent world. Large-scale multiplayer games allow multiple squads, with leaders issuing commands and a commander controlling the team's overall strategy. Multiplayer games have a variety of different styles of match. The classic types are the deathmatch, in which players score points by killing other players' characters, and capture the flag, in which teams attempt to penetrate the opposing base, capture a flag and return it to their own base whilst preventing the other team from doing the same. Other game modes may involve attempting to capture enemy bases or areas of the map, attempting to take hold of an object for as long as possible while evading other players, or deathmatch variations involving limited lives or in which players fight over a particularly potent power-up. Games may allow players to choose between various classes, each with its own strengths, weaknesses, equipment and roles within a team.